I'm here today to show you how to do the cluster stitch that is featured in the Mabel and Mabel Sister cardigan pattern designed by Fiona Alice for loop. You can see here that I've already created one row. The selvage stitches I'm using on the sides you can ignore. We're just going to focus on this stitch today because the two different patterns, the child size and the adult size, treat these edges slightly differently. So let's get started. We're going to start with the cluster stitch that is a little bit on the smaller side at the beginning of your pattern. As you go along, this will increase in size, and I'll show you how to do that in a bit, but let's start with basically what you're seeing here. The stitch starts with a slip stitch. In this case, you're on the right hand side, so you're going to start with your yarn in back, and you're going to slip the first stitch purlwise. You then are going to create what's basically an elongated stitch. And to do that, we're going to put our right needle into the first stitch as if to knit. But instead of taking your stitch off of your left hand needle, you're then going to wrap your needle one more time. Let's do it again. We're going to go in as if to knit, grab your yarn, wrap your needle one more time, so one yarn over, then pull through just like you would normally knit, and pull your stitch off. And you're going to do that 3 times. So here's the second one, knit, yarn over, pull through, and then off your needle. One more time, third time, knit, yarn over, pull through, and move it to the right. Okay, so that is basically your stitch pattern setup for the first row. You're then going to start on the next one, the next repeat. Slip first stitch, yarn in back. And this slip stitch actually works as quite a good almost marker in between these clusters. So then start again with your first one, knit, yarn over, pull through, move over. And you can see that I have 2 loops here for every knit. So through, yarn over, pull through, second time, here's my third, move over. Okay, so you can see with each purl bump, or each stitch, you've got 2 for each one. So here's 2, 4, 6, but it's actually only in 3 stitches, and then a slip stitch in between. Okay, I've now kind of just gone to the end of the row here. We're going to finish off this cluster stitch by knitting the second row, or the wrong side row. To do that, I'm just going to knit over a few stitches till I get to my pattern, and you're just knitting. Okay, and here's our first slip stitch that we encounter. You can see on the right hand side is here. And with the yarn in front, because you're on the back side now, you want to slip that stitch back over to the right. And these are our stitches that we created 2 of with the yarn overs. We're now going to move these to your right needle. The first loop is going to be moved over, and what happens is you end up dropping that second loop. 2 and number 3. And you can see we've created 3 kind of elongated stitches by dropping those yarn overs. At this point, you're going to move it back to your left hand needle. Same orientation, just move it right back. Now your yarn goes to the back of your work to start knitting. And this is where you actually create that lovely twist. Okay, so you're going to stick your needle in all 3 as if you're knitting 3 together. In there, and then instead of actually knitting it and removing it from the left hand needle, you're going to create a yarn over and go in one more time as if to knit, so that you end up with 3 stitches on the left, 3 stitches on the right. At this point, you can remove it from your left hand needle, stretch out your fabric a little bit, give yourself some room, and that's your stitch. Okay, so I've finished the second part of this stitch by working on the wrong side, the second row, we're now going to turn it over. And basically it's finished. And you can see the slip stitches in between the clusters, kind of marking them nicely. And what you want to do now is continue with the pattern, which is basically just a garter knitting front and back for a few rows before you start another cluster. So I'm going to show you as I knit across how this stitch really comes together. Okay, so we're just going to knit across here, a simple knit stitch all the way across. And you'll be knitting the slip stitches at this point and not slipping them. And here are your 3 stitches that you created your cluster with. Just knit across those. Another slip stitch is going to be knitted. And just keep going until you get to the end. And you can already start to see at this point, there's your cluster. Okay, I've done a few garter stitch rows in between, and we're going to start another row of the cluster stitch. And as you go along in this pattern, you'll see that the actual cluster gets a bit bigger. So the method is the same. I've done a few here to show you. Basically, it's slipping the first stitch and then knitting into the next few by adding a yarn over. Sometimes that'll be 3, sometimes it'll be 5, sometimes more, depending on where you are in the pattern. The stitch count increases with each row as the clusters grow bigger. Okay, so now you can see that we've finished off this row of a bigger cluster stitch. In this case, it was the 5-stitch cluster. It's slightly bigger than the one we did before with 3, and that will continue throughout the pattern. As you go along, these will get slightly bigger. The method is exactly the same. It'll be a slip stitch, and then your 3, sometimes 5, sometimes more stitches with yarn overs to create elongated stitches all the way across, and then the wrong side row will be finishing off that stitch by knitting through all 3 or all 5 or however many you have, and then creating a few extra yarn overs to give you that nice kind of cluster with that twist in between. And you can see your slip stitches in between this little detail. And that is how you do the cluster stitch featured in the Mabel and Mabel Sister Cardigan by Fiona Alice for Loop in London.